because I do 1,300 crunches and sit-ups 4 times a week.
What's a dose? Can you translate for us?
Winner of the gold medal and the champion golfer of the year is Ernie Els.
Welcome back to the Goats Track podcast about golf and golf adjacent stuff, mostly from Africa. Very, very excited about this week's episode. JDV, I can't remember actually what number episode we're on, but we're in the 90s now. So congratulations. We're getting into the nervous 90s. I don't know if we'll get to 100, but let's hope so. Very special episode we got lined up. I've got JDV on the call with me, but today we are also talking with Stuart McLean from the Top 100 fame. Stuart, nice to have you on the Go Track. Thanks for joining us.
Pleased to be here. I've heard a lot about your podcast and delighted to join you.
Great. Well, for those who don't know Stuart, and Stuart, forgive me if I get some details wrong here. You're welcome to jump in and correct. But Stuart McLean is a prominent South African golf journalist and editor, widely recognized as the pioneer of golf course rankings in South Africa. Stuart served as the editor of Golf Digest South Africa for 22 years. And then from 1998, Stuart started publishing South Africa's first extensive course rankings list, which initially started with a top 50 ranking and then moved into a top 100. And it has quickly grown to be acknowledged by the vast majority of local clubs in South Africa as the country's premier rating system. Since 2020, the rankings sit under the banner of the SA Top 100 website, which Stuart maintains and updates on a regular basis. And Stuart also serves as an international correspondent and rater for the Top 100 golf courses, contributing his assessments and reviews to their international and world top 100 ranking panels. Does that sound about right, Stuart? Have I covered the board there?
Well, I'm still editor of Golf Digest. You know, Golf Digest South Africa started up again. You were correct in saying that my first 22 years of being editor, it closed at the end of 2018, basically because of the costs of running a print magazine, the difficulties of running a print magazine. But it started up again 3 years ago as a digital magazine with new owners. And I've since relocated to Johannesburg. So it's been quite an education for me living up here, enjoying the great weather in Johannesburg and the access to a number of the best courses. So that's the situation. So the rankings today still fall under the Golf Digest banner. Once Golf Digest started up, they went to be called the Golf Digest rankings once again, but the website, the SA Top 100 Courses website, still works alongside it. So that's where we get all the reviews and the ratings for conditioning of courses.
Stuart, you and I met in the Nottingham Road pub a couple of months ago. I'm not sure if there's a more apt place to meet someone and have a beer and discuss golf courses for a few hours, and with your colleague whose name I apologize, but I forgot. But it
Simon
was
Dunn, yes.
Simon, that's right. Sorry, Simon. But it was a very enjoyable evening chatting, about golf and your experience, playing and visiting golf courses across the globe, which is quite remarkable, the amounts of travel you've done. But just sort of starting at the beginning, how did your relationship with the game of golf start? I mean, talk us briefly through your journey and that process up until now.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, Terence. I must say, I started playing golf as a junior, so I've been playing golf since 1963, and I was just a lighty. And I've kept going all these years, and I kind of fell into golf journalism a bit by accident. I did start a career as a newspaper reporter. So I've been working in media all my life after leaving school, but I never set out intentionally to be a sports writer, but rather to be involved in other aspects of newspaper reporting, from crime, politics, all those kind of things. And then I had a knack for sports writing. I liked the fact that sports writing was the only one where you could give your opinion about a match, people in the game. Basic newspaper reporting was just the facts. You put it down. You didn't sort of decide the character of the people you're writing about. So sports writing got my attention. And what happened was that newspapers, sports writing in those days was really exclusively rugby, cricket. Those are the games sports writers wanted to cover. So if you couldn't get into that, you probably got given something like the tennis or the golf beat. So being a golfer, I got involved in golf writing, and it turned out to be quite a career-defining move. So that was roughly about 50 years ago. So I've seen a lot of golf, covered major championships all around the world. So it's been a fantastic career, and a passion for golf course architecture led me to ranking the top 100 courses in South Africa.
So just talk a bit about that. Where did that passion sort of start and ignite, from your side, like the actual passion at looking and unpacking courses the way you do?
Well, I worked in the UK in the 1980s and for the Daily Telegraph as a sports writer there. I also did cricket and rugby reporting. I was quite fond of those sports as well. I still am. But golf took me to the major championships, and in the 1980s I had the opportunity to play a lot of golf in the UK at some of the great links courses. And this was before golf became an expensive game. You could play the old course at St Andrews in the early 1980s for £10, which the rand at that stage was about 4 to 1. So it was 40 rand to play the old course, some of the great courses. £20 was typical, It was extremely cheap. So you went around. I have actually played the top 100 in Scotland and in England. So I've got to myself acquainted with great golf course architecture. And it was fun just ranking the courses I'd played. I said, okay, this one looks better than that. And I compiled my own sort of lists of top hundreds. And in about 1990, I was back in South Africa then. And I published a book on the best golf courses in South Africa, a coffee table book with Strake Publishers in Cape Town. And that was 30 of the best golf courses in South Africa. And that would have been about 1991, soon after Fan Court opened. And from there, Golf Digest came along in the editorship of that in 1996. And one of my first briefs from the company at the time, Touchline Media, was let's rank the best courses in South Africa, official ranking, and took on the top 50 at that time, which was first published in 1998. We spent the whole of 1997 preparing for that ranking. And rankings at that time was a very divisive subject. I think the Complete Golfer magazine had tried to start a ranking before that. They published, say in the mid-1990s, the top 12 courses in South Africa, which is, if you look back, it seems ridiculous, the top 12. But in many cases, people who play golf today aren't aware that 30 years ago, about 50 of the top 100 golf courses in South Africa today weren't even built. They weren't around. There's been such a boom in golf course construction. Now, Complete Golfer published the top 12. And I remember Dennis Brains was the editor of Complete Golfer in those days, a very established name on the PGA of South Africa, and he knew his stuff. But the vitriol and criticism he received over those rankings, because everyone wanted to be number one. They said, why is that club number one? I should be there. And that's very common even to this day. But he couldn't take it. He says, I'm not going to do rankings. All I'm going to do is be abused by people wherever I go in this country. So I felt I had a more neutral voice. I wasn't on the PGA. I was just a ex-newspaper reporter, a journalist. So I was prepared to take the sort of flack that was coming from clubs. And it did come a lot in those early years, top 50. But today I would say that most people respect the top 100. They find them credible, and there's not as much argument today, although there are various cases which we can discuss later.
I'm sure it's a very emotive topic. In fact, I'm not sure. I know it's a very emotive topic for a lot of courses and clubs and members. And you, as you say, you've developed, that your skin has grown thicker since those early days. But I'm interested before we get into, the ranking process, and I know Jacques has some questions, on that as well. How the sort of skill of evaluating golf course architecture must be something that's sort of continuously evolving from when you started, or from when people start as they experience more golf courses around the world. How has that evolved for you over time, and what kind of experiences have steered you in terms of the people you've met, maybe books that you've read, conversations you've had with, I'm sure you've met a lot of people who do this, globally as well. What kind of role has that played for you? The travel and reading and the people that you've met.
Yeah, I think to do rankings, it is a difficult task. It requires a lot of time, a lot of sort of evaluation of courses. Even today, you can change your mind about a golf course. You see it differently. So as you say, it evolves as you go along. I think you've got to be continuously visiting golf courses to have a better idea of them. So when I was editor of Golf Digest up until 2018, my primary role was to bring out a magazine every month, not to actually rank golf courses. We did the rankings, but I relied a great deal on a large panel of people who went around the country and gave me the numbers for each course they played. And what we did then was go on those numbers, the data, and come up with a list every year. I wasn't able to visit all the courses. I tried to go to as many as I could, especially the top courses during the year. But only when I started up the SA Top 100 Courses website and focused primarily on the rankings did I then start to visit every course every year, sometimes multiple times. I promised all the courses in the top 100 I'd come and visit them, whereas before I relied on the panel for those duties. So I think in the last 6-7 years since COVID, I've really got a far better understanding of rankings. It's still very subjective. You look at a golf course and another person can see it completely differently. But you've got to go back to the basics of some of the criteria you look at, which is design variety, the playability, the aesthetics of golf courses. Those are the ones that really count. Conditioning is a big thing in South Africa. I think South African golfers expect top-class conditioning, whereas not so much in, say, if you went to the UK, people go more for the golf course. The conditioning is secondary almost.
JDV, I'm going to ask you to jump in here. You wanted to, there was a question around, courses opting in and out of rankings. Do you want to jump in with that?
I think, Stuart, maybe just to, you said you started off with the reporting on crime and politics, and I would probably say that you probably receive less criticism in terms of or putting yourself less in the firing line there than with the top hundreds. And I think maybe speaking to that is, you mentioned in your article some of the courses that have sort of that opt in or opt out. You've got your private courses, your Millvales, River Club, that are sort of not ranked. Which you can sort of understand that being, they're a private golf course, so that's why they're not wanting to be ranked. And then you've got your, Euphoria, Copperleaf and Silver Lakes, which have opted out. So there are two sort of questions there. The one is the standard saying unless a golf course opts out, all golf courses in South Africa have essentially opted in. So they are there to be ranked, I know sometimes in the past you've had the sort of the top 150, so you sort of put them into those 10 place bands without sort of actually sorting them number by number. So the first question, I suppose, is how do golf courses opt in or out? And then secondly, just I know you mentioned that they, even in the article that you said some of the courses are sort of, or the management were unhappy of where their rankings were and decided to opt out. And maybe you can just comment on that.
Yeah, well, look, it'd be nice to have all the courses in the rankings. I think that would be the happy solution. But we have a very unique situation in South Africa, where we haven't got many golf courses for a start. So to do a top 100 is actually quite ambitious. If you look at, maybe there's 220 18-hole courses in South Africa. So I don't think there's no other country in the world with so few golf courses has a top 100. They would normally say maybe go to top 20, 25, they just pick out their best courses. So we've gone, the top 100 means that you've got courses like number 1, the Links, which is a world-class golf course, to number 100, Somerset West, which have entered for the first time, which is very much a different end of the scale. A course like Somerset West in America wouldn't ever be ranked by anyone because it would be so far down. They only look at top courses. Their number 100 course is possibly better than anything in South Africa. So we have this sort of rivalry in South Africa among clubs. It's a small community, really, that they all want to be better than the other. So it's an insult to some of them. And I've had these conversations with many courses. You can go to the Eastern Cape and you put one course in the Eastern Cape ahead of another. They are offended by it. They say, how can you say that St. Francis Bay is better than my course, or Port Elizabeth Golf Club is better than my course? So these rivalries, and you get committees, captains who take this personally. It's almost like, wow, this website, this Golf Digest rankings is so annoying to me that I don't think we should be in it. And look, the Eastern Cape guys, they haven't withdrawn there. It's happened at estate courses, particularly, I think, because I think there's a lot of bigger egos involved at estates. Could be the owners, the management, the estates. There's a big rivalry there too with those estates. So we've had Elks Club, Copperleaf, Silver Lakes and Euphoria have all withdrawn. And look, it's not a question of just saying we want to withdraw, because I'm not going to withdraw them. I'll just say, look, it's better for you to be in the rankings than out of it. But they will then threaten me with legal sort of letters. I don't want to get now involved in lawyers over the rankings. If they really don't want to be in the rankings, well, I know that there's quite a few courses outside the rankings who would be delighted to be there. Courses coming into the rankings, there's a great excitement at the club. It's a day for celebration. So we've got those courses who don't want to be in, and if they don't really want to be in, then there are always replacements and courses that will appreciate it. So
just to follow up to that. I mean, I know you mentioned after COVID, the sort of approach of had changed slightly, trying to get to all the courses. But I imagine you still have a panel that goes around. Can you just maybe speak to the panel of raters? I know that there's almost from the website, where you can also, as a sort of member of the public, leave a review. Do you want to maybe speak to that a bit as to how that works? Or is it just, there's perhaps a perception out there that it's just you going around to these courses and determining the rankings one way or another?
Yes, we do have a panel. It's not as large as it used to be. In the early Golf Digest days, that panel was as large as 150 people. That's quite a sizable force. And today it's about 50. Look, the challenges with a panel in South Africa is it's a big country. It's difficult to get around. It therefore becomes a very expensive endeavor if you're a panelist and you want to go and see as many courses as possible. You've got to drive to places like Sishen. You've got to go up north if you live in Cape Town. Terrific distances. Your flights and that. So we don't get as many applications for panelists as we used to do because it is expensive to be a panelist today. But the guys still give me a lot of good feedback. And I listen to people. I listen on my travels around the country. But I would say that there are some courses that I was possibly the only person to be there at, in some years. Because being on a panel, the guys aren't going to say, okay, I want to go to the lower ranking courses. They automatically want to go and play the top courses. That's what excites them. I remember when we had panels in the old days, I would say to the guys, please go and do all these courses at the bottom. And it was difficult to get them to go there. You weren't going to get a guy in Johannesburg. He'd like to play at Glendower and Royal Johannesburg, but he's not going to go shooting off to state mines that readily, or to go down south to Glen Vista or Mfuleni. Those sort of courses, there's no appetite for them. So that is the difficulty with the ratings in South Africa. We don't have, as they do in America, Golf Digest has 1,500 panelists. People pay to be on the panel. They pay basically an entrance fee and go through an education on how to rate courses. But they're all invested in trying to play those top 100 courses, which are private. If we had 100 river clubs in this country, I can tell you we'd have 1,000 panelists. Because to get into those courses, they have to be on the panel. But it's not exciting to be a panelist if your job is to go off and play some of these lower ranking courses. That is possibly one of the most challenging things I've faced in the 30 years I've been doing the rankings. So it's important for me to go there, look at every course once or twice a year. I'll get in my car, drive around, fly places. And then when I see the ratings and conditioning coming in on the website from the public, I can say, okay, that is a reasonable judgment of that golf course's conditioning because I've been there and seen it. So that's the situation I'm in. And yes, people will assume sometimes that I have, it's a Stuart McLean's top 100, but that is not the case. I can tell you that there's quite a number of courses at the top of the rankings that aren't my favorites. If it was my favorite top 100, it would look totally different. I try to stay as neutral as I can, but obviously there will always be insinuations that I play too big a role in it. But at the same time, and this is one of the things which you want to discuss for the future, if I drop dead tomorrow, I don't know whether the top 100 rankings would continue.
Yeah, that is a question. And just to follow up on the panel, Stuart, how do you, if somebody applies, they say they want to be on the panel, there's obviously some sort of assessment you have to do in terms of, you spoke about, guys going through an education process, but there's got to be some sort of experience process as well to see, okay, well, how many courses have you seen sort of, already? And how do you, because I think there must be a lot of bias when it comes into these scoring categories when you're scoring courses relative to each other and that. I'm sure there's a whole psychology around that. So how do you kind of assess that someone is, I suppose, fit to be on the panel?
Yeah, it's always tricky. You never know how a panel member is going to turn out. The passion must be there. And we have got some very passionate members, I must say, the raters who go around the country and see as many courses as possible. And they're good at what they do. And they're learning all the time. I think I've taken a few under my wing over the years, but it is something which only comes to you over time. You've got to really go there and be totally unbiased about every golf course you see. You've got to look for the strengths and weaknesses of golf courses, without having your favorites. It's not about whether you played the golf course well or not. You've got to just distract yourself from that. Often I'll go and rate a course without playing it. I can get as much information by doing that, and it helps me in terms of time. To play every golf course would actually be too much. It's exhausting. Then you could probably only do one a day. Whereas if I'm traveling, I can possibly two, 3 courses a day. have a good look at them, and you're not then distracted by your own game. And often I'll do that assessment with a member of the club, a golf director, a greenkeeper, the manager, pointing out things that they've improved upon, what they're working on. Those are all helpful towards assessing the rankings. And that's, again, what makes the South African rankings extremely unique, because it's almost like a community. The top 100, I've got used to people. I've met a lot of people over the years, members, staff at these clubs. And there's some sort of a bond between us, I would say that I get to know the courses and the people very well. And it's difficult at times to say your course has gone down, in the rankings, because it's almost like a personal insult to these people that have done that. But I think the big thing is to reward golf courses for what they achieve every year. The top 100 changes, and most of those changes are due to improvements to the golf course, better aesthetics, better playability, better conditioning. That's what it comes down to.
Do you get offered a lot of free drinks in the bars afterwards, after walking around?
We normally have a drink if it's late in the day,
Yeah.
But I try to remain above all that. Yes, there's no sort of.
No, I tell you what, Stuart, just listening to you talk and that, I myself have been caught up in some of the emotive stuff around the rankings, and in some ways I really envy what you do in terms of the travel and that. In some ways I don't envy it at all in terms of the politics and the emotion that goes into it. But we wanted to fire a couple of questions, Stuart, just around the categories. I think, just to unpack it a little bit, maybe for some of our listeners, I think you do provide descriptions on the SA Top 100 website and in the Golfers Digest. But maybe we can talk through a couple of things in some of the categories, and it would help for you to kind of elaborate on a few of these things. So I think just firstly, so for those who are listening who don't know really how the ranking process is done, I'm assuming, Stuart, you get scores for as many, say, panelists for all of these categories, panelists who have visited the course during a certain year, as well as your score, and then that's how sort of a final a value is derived for each category. Is that pretty accurate?
Well, all the scores for every course are on the website. For the last 6 years, every year I put up what they've scored. So those scores that they've got are really the benchmark around which panelists will work. They won't come up with something extreme like give top marks for a course way down the ranking. You've got to sort of look at it and say, okay, does this course out of place in the rankings, so it should be getting higher marks, or should I be marking it similarly to where it is? So we're working closely with historic data. The only thing that we get a lot of marks for is the conditioning, because that comes in from the public. So that's more fluid, I would say, than people. We've got, unless you're bringing in new panelists all the time, some of these rankings, the marks for these criteria don't change too much. They're very fractional. So
let's just, you mentioned conditioning. So just for the listeners' sake, there are 6 categories we have, and they have different values associated to them. But we have conditioning is 20 points. We've got aesthetics, 15 points. Playability, 20 points. Design variety, 15. Memorability and consistency, 15. And shot values. You mentioned conditioning was one where it is the one category where you get public feedback. And when you and I chatted in Notties, you explained to me that is sort of to remove any prejudice that somebody may have if somebody visited at a specific time of year. It's to give the course a better average of conditions over a 12-month period. And then I'm assuming with the 20 points, you have some sort of weighting between greens and fairways and tee boxes. Is that sort of accurate, that each of those items are kind of get their own little sub score?
Yes, the 20 points, the greens get 10 points and the rest of them get another 10, and that's the bunkers, tees, fairways, and presentation, which is quite big. It's about 4 points for presentation. So I look closely at presentation of a golf course. It's one of the big things that I've sort of come to my attention, I would say, in the last 6 years or so, how courses are presented by the maintenance crew, really, because it's not just about having perfect greens or fairways that are good. It's the way you present the course, the image you get from the moment you step onto a golf course. And that's the big difference you'll find between the top courses and the bottom courses, mainly because the budget is there to do that sort of detailed work. You know, the top courses, the big difference is huge budgets. You know, $1 million a month is nothing, whereas some courses will be struggling along on 200,000 Rand a month. So their conditioning comes in from the public, but I have to be very careful on how I look at each of those ratings, because it's a strange person. Sometimes I do have members of the public who are not raters who regularly produce reviews and ratings because they just like doing it. You know, they've got in the habit, they'll go and play a course and they'll put in what they think about it. You know, and then I get a different type of rater. I mean, this week I had a woman putting in a rating, but all she was interested, she said she was ripped off at this golf club because the chips that she ordered cost 42 Rand and you could only count 15 of them. So I do get reviews like that, you know.
That sounds like that's not the sort of thing that we talk about on the Go Track, not on the SA Top 100 website. That's we regularly talk about the pies and gravy and we rank them. So maybe she needs to get in touch with us and give us some of her opinions.
Yes, so she didn't give a very good mark for the halfway house, I can tell you that.
I wanted to ask about aesthetics, Stuart.
Before I go into that, the other thing which, before I leave that, I just want to say that I do get a lot of ratings and reviews from foreign golfers, funnily enough, which I find very invaluable because they come to this country without any perception of what are our top courses or not. They'll go to a golf course, which could be a really good golf course, and say, oh, this is a terrible place. I don't know how you guys can rate it so highly. And then they'll go to a golf course further down and say, this is a brilliant golf course. So I think foreigners have a different viewpoint of our courses. If you brought in, say, 10 overseas raters and said, redo the top 100 in South Africa, you might have a totally different outlook on who comes top and who comes bottom, which is interesting. So the top 100 rankings in South Africa are very much aligned to South African golfers' viewpoints on golf courses. You know, they like modern golf courses. They like well-conditioned courses. They don't like quirky courses. You know, we were at Nottingham Road where Gowrie Farm, Guy Smith has built some interesting links-type holes there, which have become quite controversial. And a number of South African golfers don't really take easily to that kind of design work. They'll accept it if they're over in Scotland, but try and bring it to South Africa, and no, they won't really appreciate it. So the South African rankings are really aligned to South African golf.
Okay, I think that's a really interesting point that you bring in there. And you and I had a similar discussion at Nottingham Road around, let's just say the general level or interpretation or understanding of golf architecture of the general public. And I don't know whether that's limited necessarily to South Africa. I would imagine globally, the majority of just pure golfers maybe don't all, I think in America you would find exactly the same thing. The majority of golfers maybe don't necessarily have a don't have or don't care about, the architecture, and, they want their golf cart and their beautiful fairways, and, they're judging the halfway house heavily in that. So, do you have any foreign guys actually on the panel out of interest?
No, but I've connections with, the guys who run the rankings in other parts of the world, and they've been out here, and interesting to hear their views on our courses. Going back, I would say historically, our golf course architecture in South Africa was very different from other parts of the world, like America, Australia, the UK, because there was not much emphasis put on very creative greens complexes in this country. A chap like Bob Grimsdale, who did a lot of our golf courses, his greens were very plain in shape. He worked more on the routing of golf courses, and the greens were like an afterthought almost, until later in life when he started to realize that the greens were a feature of every hole. So if you went to Australia and you played the sandbelt courses there in Melbourne, the greens are astonishing. The contours, the slopes, the bunkers. When Jack Nicklaus brought in a few contours at Houghton with his redesign in 2010, the Houghton members had apoplexy because the contours were too severe. They were not used to this, being able to putt from one side of the green and having to go up this slope like you do at Augusta. They didn't like the fact that it was quite possible to three-putt every green. You had to be skillful as a putter. And South African golfers, our history, the golf courses weren't designed like that. They were big greens, maybe a few slopes here and there, but putting is easy. You can see some of the older courses in this country which haven't really modernized their greens. They're very plain in shape. And if you play elsewhere in the world, the likes of Tom Doak, Ben Crenshaw, the greens that they build today are spectacular, but you've got to be able to chip and putt to some awkward positions. We've just watched that USPGA at Aronimink, where the pros were tested on the greens, every green. That sort of green would never be tolerated in South Africa. So these are
are there specific courses? Are there specific courses where that the older courses where you would say that wasn't the case? Some of the golden age courses. I'm thinking of like Charles Allison. With like some of the green complexes. Would you say those were designed quite differently back then?
They might have been, but I don't think any of our top courses today have their original greens, which they have elsewhere in the world. The greens have all been redesigned, many of them by Golf Data, which have improved the courses. Take a course like Park View in Johannesburg. Golf Data redid their greens at the turn of the millennium, and they are superb constructions, beautiful greens. So the original greens were very plain. So we don't have any historic courses that, like Donald Ross did Aronimink. Those are the original greens.
Original greens.
As they said in that telecast, the same structures there were 100 years ago. We don't have anything like that. We do have some courses. If you go to Goldfields West out in Gauteng, they've got the original greens there. We're still with the Scarpla Synoden grass, but they're very unimaginative, flat greens. Some of them are quite interesting because you can look back on what South African greens were like. And that was a Bob Grimsdale course from the late 1940s, and certainly all he did was lay out the greens because they didn't have the machinery for a start to really get creative, and he was just trying to do something that would be to everyone's enjoyment.
Stuart, I'm gonna just run through a couple of other categories here. I know we've probably pressed for time a little bit, but I wanted to talk a little bit about aesthetics. That's 15 points in the ranking. So obviously, a lot of courses benefit from being in very picturesque, incredible locations, and a lot of that scenery, but that is obviously outside of the golf course. Now, I know in the description of the category, you mentioned sort of trying to keep the attention on, the inside of the property. But how difficult is that really to do? How difficult is that to balance out when someone's at, Pinnacle Point, or if I compare a place like, let's say, Serengeti, right next to the OR Tambo airport versus like a Pinnacle Point, it's very difficult as the golfer to separate, your external environment from the course. Like how I mean, from a ranking perspective, how do you factor that into aesthetics?
Yeah, aesthetics is a big part of golf. It's essentially inside the course, but the background to your golf course can make it even better. You could take an example, say, George now, where there's been quite a lot of devastation at George Golf Club, one of the big news items last year, where they've lost all those trees. How that will impact their aesthetics. They had a beautiful golf course with all these magnificent trees and framed by the mountains. The loss of those trees could impact it significantly, because suddenly the trees were hiding buildings and structures around the course. So, yes, Pinnacle Point has got good aesthetics, but it's not the top aesthetics in the country, even though it's spectacular. But the aesthetics would also be marred by all the housing that around the course, as opposed to, say, if Pinnacle Point had no housing there at all. So you get a course like Umdoni Park on the KZN South Coast, which to me is some of the best aesthetics in South Africa. It's got the ocean, it's got a forest, it's got no housing there. So that would be, I would say, one of the top courses in terms of aesthetics. I think the best score for aesthetics was achieved by the links at Fancourt, which is again away from the residential part of Fancourt. You go out onto the course and you're in nature, and you've also got that wonderful backdrop of the mountains. So that's where the mountains now come into play with attractive flora and fauna around you. Plus, the design of a golf course also must be taken into effect in aesthetics, the way it looks on the golf course, just the sheer maintenance, the beautiful maintenance of the golf course. If a golf course could be in a very attractive setting, but say the golf course itself look tatty and, it's got the wrong type of trees or bushes around it, can detract from aesthetics. Yeah, so aesthetics is quite a tricky one to evaluate in many ways. It's not that simple.
I'd imagine a lot of these categories are. There could be perceived when the average person reads through the description of some of the categories to be a bit of grey area between the categories, which I'm sure there is. But just bear with me here. How do you balance design? The category of design variety with shot values. Sort of both of them seem to ask for variety in holes. But then when we look at like memorability, you want to have distinctive characteristics for each hole, but you want to try and balance that with like a golden thread between them. Now, that's just sort of taken from your descriptions. I think for the average golfer, that's probably quite a lot to process. Can you sort of maybe just briefly unpack when you're walking around a course, how do you look at sort of, let's say those three categories, the design variety, memorability, and shot values? How do you practically assess that when you're walking a course?
Yeah, look, there is possibly, we're going on the Golf Digest recommendations. That's how it started off. We followed exactly their remit in how to rate golf courses. But it changed when Golf Digest closed in 2018. I did change quite a few of the criteria and also improved the marks for some of them.
Yes.
But yeah, look, you could unpack it even further and maybe had simpler 4 criteria maybe: conditioning, playability, aesthetics, and then the rest, design, variety, memorability, and shot values, could be packed into one criteria. And say you gave them more, maybe, say you gave that area maybe 30 points or something like that. It might make it simpler. Not all ranking criteria around the world follow the same theme. So there is a sort of good reason to change them, but I suppose I know these criteria quite well.
Yes.
So, like the memorability, I'm really looking for distinction on a golf course, something unusual. There are golf courses today which, yes, they are nice. It makes for an attractive golf course, but it's very similar. You might think, well, I've seen that before. So to me, when I'm looking at course, I'm looking for something that's unusual, a really good piece of course architecture, which you don't see too often. And you do see it sometimes, the older courses from a classic sort of designer, whereas the modern architecture today can often be very bland and similar. They follow a pattern of how to design golf courses. So if you look around at all our courses built in the last 25 years, you'll see noticeable patterns of similarity between them. So memorability would be trying to find that individuality in many ways. Yes. Design variety comes down to a conformity of you haven't got holes all in a straight line. You've got dog legs. You've got a bit of uphill. Some courses you might find, yes, all the dog legs go from left to right or right to left, and that might be a weakness. Or, you say you go to Gary Player Country Club, and there's not one short par 4 at Gary Player Country Club. I mean, maybe okay for a professional golfer, a short par 4 might be 360 meters. The way the pros play today, a short par 4, 360 meters, yes. But the guys who are playing these courses, and I'm looking at rankings in terms of a club member and how they play. So a short par 4 to me is like a 300-meter golf hole. So Gary Player Country Club has been built for difficulty. So a short par 4, Gary Player doesn't really go for them much. If you look at his designs, short par 4s aren't really his remit at all.
Yes.
And whereas today the short par 4, even in the majors, the setup of the course, they're encouraging guys to go for greens. We had an excellent example of that, the 13th hole at Aronimink, where it was still, even though they could easily attack the green with their tee shots, a birdie wasn't inevitable.
But maybe I can jump in there and to go to that point before I get on to the next question. The tees, the different tees that a club has to offer, I mean, that would obviously speak greatly to the design, variety, shot values, playability. Are you sort of looking at these from, the back tees most of the time, or are you sort of determining, because it would play very differently, for the red tees of someone of a different ability. So how do the different tee options factor into those categories?
Yes, I'll look at all the tees really and what clubs are doing with them. As an older golfer, I'll often play a course off the blue tees. I'll mix up white or blue because blue can be a lot more fun to play. And playability, I think, is affected by that. Some clubs have done pretty well with their blue tees, and it's not just for older golfers, it's for everyone really. It depends on your ability. There's still a sort of thought in this country that we must play off the back tees. That Gary Player Country Club, when guys go there, they don't want to play off the front tees. They want to go to the championship tees if possible to give their games the full workout. But really the enjoyability of golf is to play off tees with which you're comfortable, where you can hit a drive and a short iron, you can attack the pins, you can make a good score. But if you If you don't have a good iron game, maybe it might be better to play off the back tees. But there's quite a few courses I've noticed where the blue tees are certainly not thought out very carefully. And I won't name any names here, but you've got golf courses where the blue tees will be placed, say a blue tee should be about 300 or 400 meters shorter than a white tee. And a white tee should be 300 or 400 meters shorter than the yellow tees, which are usually the back tees. But they'll often crush these tees together because they don't have other tees. Some clubs, in the old days, everyone played off one tee. Modern courses, you'll see a variety of tees spread out over maybe 100 meters, whereas an old course might still have its original back tee, and that's where everyone played from. Now, they haven't gone to the trouble of now building new tees for the blue tee or red tee people. So everyone's still confined to one tees, and that's where they're not really, they're becoming unplayable off certain tees. You may as well just play off the back tees. And some of them will say, okay, I'm going to get my 400 meters out of these blue tees. We'll have a difference of 400 between white and blue. But what they do is on 5 holes, they'll have 80 meters difference. And then the other 13 holes, everyone plays off the white or blue. So that's where I think courses haven't really come to terms with this new handicapping system and the setup of the course.
And that setup, Stuart, would go to the playability category. Is that correct? Or would it
definitely playability? Yes.
But I suppose that would also infiltrate the others because your shot value would change. I mean, that's where, and I think my next point is going to Terence's about how those, particularly those 4 are interlinked, the playability, design variety, memorability, and shot values. And I suppose the second point there is, if you're looking at those as fundamental golf course features in terms of the design, how static are those? Because, without putting in new tee boxes, like you said, or putting in bunkers or restoring or renovating greens, is it not pretty static in terms of those categories for courses? Because they, once they've been rated a particular way, they can't change without a redesign.
Not sure I quite understand you, but look, the shot values shouldn't change if you set up the course properly from what's tee. If I play off a white tee sometimes, which is further back, a lot of the trouble doesn't come into play anymore. But if I go to a blue tee, I suddenly find myself, the bunkers are there in my length.
Okay, so sorry.
Today.
Yes. Sorry.
Go on.
I just said if we take away the tee aspect of it, so we're just looking at the categories and saying, if you've got, let's call it a wild coast, and you said, okay, it's a good design, it's a good layout, the playability is there, the shot values are there, but once that it's basically set in stone, that aspect of the rating, because it's a design feature. So your conditioning can change, and the aesthetics and the presentation, etc. are granted that will change sort of every 2 years, depending on how much effort or budget they put into that. But without having like a redesign, doesn't that create a floor or a ceiling for these courses where if they haven't redesigned or put in bunkers or renovate screens, etc., they can't really move up or down in those categories?
Yes, I agree with you there. I would say that those 3 areas, design, variety, memorability, and shot values, the marks stay very much the same year on year. The changes are playability, which is a tricky one because playability also talks about challenges for golfers. So we used to have a category called resistance to scoring, which is the Americans had, but we discarded that when Golf Digest closed for the first time, as I felt it was more applicable to American courses where their top courses are championship layouts. So that resistance to scoring, I thought, favoured perhaps 10% of South African courses, our top courses, very much so, yes. And the game has also moved on a lot since then too. Golf courses all used to be very long. Nowadays, the ability to hit the ball so far off the tee has rendered a lot of golf courses quite short. That isn't a factor anymore in golf. So shot values and resistance to scoring were sort of categories which really suited like a Gary Player country club. But which today, I think Gary Player would still have very good shot values, but the resistance to scoring, of course, is no longer there. So it lost out on that category.
So Stuart, let me use Selborne here as an example, being the biggest sort of upward mover in this set of rankings. It did actually gain on sort of a design aspect. How does that happen? I'm certainly not saying Selborne didn't deserve to move up. I'm thrilled to see it move up, being playing there and going down the south coast. But I just wanted to sort of understand with Selborne not having done a redesign, but granted they've improved sort of conditioning and presentation. I mean, how do you square that with the ranking improving based on sort of increased points on the sort of design aspects? Is it what you were saying, just because of the technology and that sort of thing, or is it different panelists going there and sort of assessing it differently?
Okay, Selborne is an interesting case. Selborne is a course that opted to withdraw from the rankings in about 2021. They were in the top 100, and then the management and committee at the time said, no, we don't want to be in there because obviously we're far better than you think we are. And they withdrew. So then there was a change of committee and different approach was saying, they said, we want to come back into rankings. And that was last year. So it's only just over 12 months ago that they decided to change their attitude towards the rankings and wanted to be part of it. So really we started afresh at Selborne again, having been out of the rankings for 4 years, relook at Selborne, and people were going back there again because once they were not in the rankings, no raters went there. So an absence of 4 years without anyone going there, I certainly didn't go there because I knew that I wouldn't be welcome. And they've got a security gate, so I probably wouldn't get through that. So, yeah, Selborne is a special case, and I guess the same would apply now to a course like Silver Lakes if they decided to come back in. Then we've got to relook at the golf course. And where do they come in? Do they go back to their where they used to be, or do you start near the bottom again, It's a tricky one, that. You've got to re-rate it. I think Silver Lakes would obviously come in much higher. It's still a good course. But Selborne was different in that respect. So it's also a course which has been very high up the rankings historically, but which has fallen backwards a bit. So it's a course, to me, I notice with raters that some of them think that Selborne is an excellent golf course and should be in the top 50 even, and others who don't give it that much respect. So it's a bit of a difficult one, Selborne. But I guess there are courses like that in the rankings which some people love and some people dislike.
Well, just to continue to pick on the major movers in KZN, the one that dropped quite substantially was Mhlali. Maybe you can sort of just give an example of sort of how the rating categories and you sort of Mhlali in general as to what made it drop. Again, I think, just to tack onto that question and you can sort of maybe address it, is when I've chatted to people, they conflate clubhouse and facilities and the general club with the rating or the ranking of a golf course. And I've always said, look, I think there's a difference between your experience that you have in the locker rooms and the clubhouse and the pub and the rest of it with the golf course itself. Is that something that you've, maybe not subconsciously, but I look at an Mhlali that's got nice facilities, it's a very nice club, but maybe that the golf course hasn't kept up with those sorts of, with the way that the club is upgraded?
Yes, there are clubs that certainly think that the clubhouse facilities are part of the rankings, and that's due to the fact that when I started the Top 100 Courses website, you allowed people to rate the facilities just as an extra interest, so you could give your description the halfway house. That's why we have that woman complaining about the rip-off of the chips.
Expensive chips.
So she was hoping that maybe that course would go down because the chips weren't affordable. But
just to be clear, Stuart, we're not going to name and shame that particular golf course, are we? On their chips.
No, but it's quite a well-known golf course.
Okay.
And I suppose that's why their chips. I think that if you're a highly ranked course, you can put up the price of your chips, yes.
Maybe count how many you're putting out. If you're in the kitchen and you're only putting 15 chips out, we know who you are.
Yeah.
Look, I think that, halfway, you shouldn't eat too many chips anyway. It's not very good for your golf.
Maybe they should be getting plus points for that. They're actually looking out for the general health and welfare of the golfers.
For sure. So some clubs really do believe that if they've got a better halfway house or a restaurant or a better driving range, that'll send them rocketing up the rankings. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So it really is down to the golf course itself. And get back to Mhlali. Yeah, Mhlali has done well in the rankings. It fell this year, and it doesn't take a loss of many points to fall a long way. The courses, if you study them closely, the points difference between them is marginal. So an average of maybe 1 point between 5 courses. And what I've seen, I spent a few weeks in KZN in March, looking at all the courses, and was joined by a number of raters. And the quality of the maintenance of courses in Natal very much impressed us this year. It was excellent conditioning, and I think a lot of that is down to Matco Turf. They've done superb work at the courses they're looking after in KZN. And frankly, I think Mhlali just wasn't up to the same standards from what we saw of the course, and compared to the others, their conditioning wasn't as good, and I think it went down. It's just, the same with Bryanston happened they went down 9 places. So it can very much happen. Every year there's going to be courses that go up jump a lot, and others that really rocket down. It's just a perfect storm around them. That's all. It's not to say that Mhlali is a bad golf course. It hasn't just gone from being a good golf course. It's an excellent Peter Matkovich design. And these are things which, happen. I guess it's
just to jump in here, JDV and Stuart, you can rest assured that none of us are defenders of Mhlali conditioning because I think we know they've had a couple of tough few years. But JDV, just looking at the last year versus this year, pretty much all the design course stuff at Mhlali was unchanged in terms of the rankings. Where they lost points was on aesthetics, 0.3, and conditioning 0.7, and that adds up to that's 1 point less, and as Stuart said, that's 1 point in that band where they're tightly squeezed. 1 point is 12 places. So that is what it is.
They went down a point, but a lot of courses are going up a point. So that in that category, it's a very competitive area. That sort of band 60 to 80. There's a lot of excellent golf courses there. Some like Obai, you might see, is, they went way down one stage because they had issues with the ownership, and there wasn't any money being put into maintenance. They really went through a dreadful time. They now got a new ownership and on the way back up the rankings. So there's courses that are really pushing forward from there. So if you have a bad year with your conditioning, you can go back 12 places. That's very possible.
Shout out to all the Western Cape courses that have just had a 1 in 50 year storm, because KZN might be making a comeback next year based on some of the videos and photos we've seen of the Western Cape courses. We send our thoughts and prayers to all the members down there. I'm sure there's a lot of recovery that's going to go on.
Yes, Stuart, I think Robertson is one of the courses that may have. Looking at some of the pictures, it looks like a lot of holes have been wiped out totally. I think the most destruction is possibly at Robertson Golf Club, which is very sad.
And that is sad. And it goes to your point earlier around the budgets that some of these courses have to operate in. And, I suppose what's really sad about, the fan courts and that are going to rebuild, or recover, and probably even George. But it is these little gem 9-holers and that when, you have an event like that, which, it can really bring them to their knees, if not be the death knell. So, yeah, we hope that we're not going to lose too many courses from that particular event. Stuart, we're going to move to sort of wrapping up here, and yeah, thanks so much for your time. And I think JDV and I could sit here for a couple of hours having questions. So we would definitely love to chat golf architecture with you again sometime. But just sort of two last questions, and one of them you can abstain from answering because I know it's more of a subjective question, but the first one is just around what would you say separates the top courses in South Africa from the rest of the world, or rather the converse. What separates the top courses in the world from, say, the top courses in South Africa, and where do our top courses, in your view, sit in sort of a global top 100 ranking? How many of them do you think would be in there? I'm sure we could go and look it up, but just from your perspective.
Well, it's interesting you asked this question because Golf Digest in America have just announced their sort of biennial top 100 courses in the world outside America, because obviously America have got the best courses. So they're just pandering to the rest of us. And for the first time, there's not one South African course in this list. And I would say that there should be, because we have got good courses that are worthy of inclusion in that top 100, certainly the top 100 that I see. But it all, again, comes down to international raters aren't coming to South Africa to play our courses because we don't have any courses by the top designers in the world. And that's apologies to Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player himself. But the top designers these days are your Tom Dokes, your Coor and Crenshaw, your Gil Hans, those sort of people who have really done exceptional stuff. And in many ways, our golfing tourism is good. We get a lot of people from Europe coming to the Cape, especially to play our courses, because they find them very affordable, fun to play. But we don't have, how would you describe it, those great golf courses that attract a different audience.
Those sort of bucket lists, so
like New Zealand, courses. New Zealand is a country where they were fortunate enough to get all these hedge fund billionaires building golf courses, and they brought in Tom Doak, Coor and Crenshaw, those kind of people, and they now become destinations for the wealthy golfers, the guys who you can charge $1,000, £1,000, they will come and play your course. We don't have any of those golf courses. Whereas New Zealand, I was looking in this latest top 100, have got 8 golf courses in the top 100 in the world. We don't have one. Although I think the Links at Fancourt should be in there, and I think Durban Country Club should be in there too. I think those are 2 very special, unique golf courses. But it's an interesting situation, but we also have a very good golf tourism here because our courses are attractive, they're accessible, they're affordable, although they are becoming more expensive, but we're still well priced to attract those people.
I think what will be interesting to see is, is there an appetite at some stage for someone to lure and to invest in the country, because we certainly probably have the land, some good golf land that hasn't been developed, and to see whether or not in the long run it would be feasible to get some of those architects to Southern Africa. When you look at the combination of golf and the other sort of tourist activities that that can be combined with in the country. I think my feedback that I hear a lot from foreigners coming here is that they can't believe that how high the floor is of our sort of top 30, let's say top 30 or 40 courses, and the value that represents. I mean, if you look at courses that are currently sitting in the top 30 or 40 on the rankings, there's some incredibly good golf there at incredible value for foreigners. So that seems to be where we're positioning ourselves is in that like very high value plus the combo of the unique safari stuff that can be done in the country.
I'd say
Stuart,
before you go, I'd say the best place now for golf in South Africa is probably KZN in terms of affordability and top golf courses. The Garden Route.
There we go.
Is really saturated with visitors, and the prices are 3-4 times what you pay in Natal. Other than Durban Country Club, which has now become exclusive private club, but certainly, Natal is an excellent destination, and probably the quality of the golf course design there is very good.
Okay, Stuart, this is a question that you're welcome to abstain from, but this is obviously subjective, but if you had to just shoot off your list of, let's not say the best golf courses in South Africa, let's say your sort of 5 favorite places to play in the country. Are you willing to name them, or are we putting you in a tough position?
But I think prime that a bit better, Terence. So Stuart, we always have this discussion about best versus favorite, and you can look at courses and say, oh, that's the best course I've played, but favorite's got that something else. Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's somewhere you went as a child, and maybe it's your home club. So those become your favorites. I know we always talk about Mdoni. We go on holiday there. It's one of my favorite golf courses, although it would be hard pressed to say it's one of the best golf courses I've played. So maybe just to give the question a bit more context, that I think favorite is very different from best.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer your question. I get asked a lot my favorite courses, and it's a difficult one because I have a lot of favorite golf courses. There's no one course that I think, wow, that's a course I'd want to play for the rest of my life. I grew up in East London, so I've a lot of love for East London Golf Club. I think it is a really unique, world-class golf course. If you got a top designer in there to fix it up a bit, it would be number one in South Africa. It has a few holes that definitely could be improved upon, but it is a lovely place to play golf. And it's quite a windy area, but the course has been set up quite nicely for the wind and enjoyable to play at all times. I enjoy courses with a state of play aspect, Another course nearby East London, actually Olivewood. I enjoy going there. I think that's a fabulous place to stay. They have great villas right on the golf course, excellent restaurant. Same with Gowrie Farm in Natal. Brilliant place to go for a few days with your mates. They've just built some new accommodation, so it's outstanding. When I go to Mdoni, I always stay at Boerter House, the bed and breakfast right next to the golf course, the old building. That's very special. So Prince's Grant, the lodge there. I really love going to Prince's Grant, playing that golf course. Those are the kind of places that I enjoy. And I think that's a big part of golf for me, which maybe we don't have enough of in this country, is the stay and play aspect. A fan court, those big resorts, they're very different. Fan court is a special experience, really great to go there. It's 5-star. It must be one of the best resorts in the world, in my opinion. The quality of the golf, the quality of the service, the accommodation is exceptional. But I do like those smaller places where it's more intimate, it's more golf orientated, whereas Fan Court is a big resort. It's attracting people, with a lot of different interests, not just golf. So those are some of my favorites that I really, really like playing during the year. I try and get there when I can. And I forget, another favorite of mine is Champagne Sports Resort. I really think that's a good golfing destination. It's certainly, I've gone there more often in recent years. Now living in Johannesburg, it's not as far as from Cape Town, and come to respect it as a terrific golf destination. Lovely clubhouse. The facilities at the hotel are excellent, and they've got timeshare there. It's one of the most popular places for golfers, and I think more golf tours are going there now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've named some of my favorite destinations as well, and I think I value something very similar, and I think Jacques does as well. It's just these sort of places where you can just immerse yourself in the golf and in the environments. Not necessarily it's that entire experience versus just the pure conditioning or that. So, and I think we're super blessed across the country to have so many awesome different destinations like that. So appreciate you answering that question, because I'm sure it's difficult, but you've got really thick skin now, Stuart, so you sorted when it comes to people criticizing you.
I think whoever replaces me as the editor of the magazine and runs the top 100 courses into the future, yes, you've got to have a thick skin. And look, I think, you must just accept that you are going to be criticized at times, but it's the top 100 is bigger than the clubs.
Absolutely.
I feel that it's good for South Africa to have that list. The clubs are pretty passionate about it. I would say 90% of them like it. They enjoy that it's there. And it boosts the game of golf. Really, the top 100 courses are there to increase the popularity of golf, to get people talking about our golf courses and comparing them. So long may it last.
Yeah. I love chatting with people who are on the quest to tick off the top 100, and they'll be in a random spot, like go and tick off like a McCarthley or so something like that, where you're in a strange part of the country, but you need to tick that off. So it's another great thing for me about having the top 100. But Stuart, we really appreciate your time, and look forward to having many more conversations, I'm sure. But thanks so much for contributing to our podcast. And JDV, if there's nothing else, I think we will end the podcast there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, T. Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks for including me.